Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Blockchain Central, coming from Davos, live. And this is the Global Blockchain Business Council. This session is on reinventing the refugee experience. So a topic that's very, very pertinent for today's discussions, or the discussions this week in Davos, and what's happening in the world today. My name is Robert Opp. I'm the Director of Innovation and Change Management at the United Nations World Food Programme. The World Food Programme is an agency of the UN that is responsible for providing food assistance to between 80 and 100 million people a year across 85 countries. And, you know, a lot of the people that we serve actually are refugees or displaced. And we have a wave of humanity currently that is displaced. So the current numbers are somewhere around 69 million people worldwide have been displaced from their homes. 25 million of those are refugees, so they've crossed borders. And when you are displaced, you end up with a lot of basic needs. In other words, you need food, shelter, some of those basic needs. But actually, a lot of times people don't realize it's also if you've lost your identification or if you are unable to access financial services, these are parts of the problem that make being a refugee very difficult. And so today we have a panel that's going to discuss some of these issues, a panel of wonderful people who've got all sorts of different angles and perspectives on this issue. And we're really going to start to talk about how the refugee experience might be reinvented using technology, but maybe not. So we want to actually interrogate that question a little bit. So I would like to turn to my panel to introduce themselves quickly. Armand, do you want to start, please?
Thank you, Rob. My name is Armand Arton. I'm a founder of Arton Capital, which advises governments on migration policies, and the Global Citizen Forum, which is our non-profit that tackles migration from all perspectives of refugees, economic empowerment, security, and technology. Thank you.
My name is Mariana Dahan. I'm the CEO, co-founder of the World Identity Network, and previously I was with the World Bank leading the Identification for Development ID4D Global Agenda.
I'm Mike Zuckerman. I'm a creative activist with TO. I like to refer to myself as an NGI instead of an NGO, a non-governmental individual. I project manage a refugee camp in Greece. I've been living illegally with refugees in refugee camps in Uganda. There's no cameras here, right? And yeah, now we're legal. But in order to kind of learn about the system, I just kind of show up and work as an independent and build relationships with refugees themselves.
That's really awesome. Guys, very excited to be here. My name is Henri Arslanian. Really, my passion and my focus in life is the future of the financial services industry. And I do this, just like I get paid by PwC to do this as a living, where I run our FinTech and crypto practice for Asia. But I also do it in my academic life. I'm a professor at the University of Hong Kong, where I teach FinTech and write books about it. And I also do it in my civil society life, where I'm the chairman of the FinTech Association in Hong Kong and many other organizations. Very excited, you know, in my real life, in my day-to-day, we help a lot of crypto companies, from crypto exchanges to governments and policy on crypto. But today's topic is something that's very close to my heart. My background is Armenian, and 100 years ago, my family was actually a part of the Armenian genocide, and we were literally refugees, and we had to start from scratch. And obviously, with the situation going on in Syria, it's something that is very close to our heart, where I have a lot of family still in Aleppo. So very excited to be here and share with all of you today.
Great, thanks everybody. So I first want to just, let's get into this issue a little bit more and in framing. And Armand, I want to turn to you because you've done a lot of work on global citizenry and refugee issues. So tell us a little bit about what you see going on in terms of what's happening with migration, refugee movements now, responses of governments.
Thank you, Rob, for the question. Well, migration, as you know, is the first thing that pops up on your phone alerts, newspapers covers, policy conversations. This is what changes governments. And we believe it's a very relevant question. Unfortunately, I see it as a failure of our society. And if we don't fix it now, it's only going to get worse. We have, and you have the statistics, about 70 million people who are displaced today. Statistics shows that by the next 25 years, this number will grow. By 2050, 10% of the global population will have to relocate from their place of birth because of climate change. Will be more than 10 billion. So we're talking about 1 billion. If I don't know how to handle 70 million, how my kids will handle 1 billion? And this is a society that is progressing. Our thoughts are tweeted, our money is transferred, and yet our physical bodies cannot cross borders. because of a little paper called a passport. That was not our choice. The biggest lottery of our life is the countries where we're born, and none of us can change it. So I think migration has to take part of this technology innovation, and I think it is probably one of the sectors that has delayed so much in terms of implementing what blockchain and technology can do for digital identity, for tracking funds, for supporting and fighting corruption. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the support that governments are putting together is wasted. We work for the last 15 years with governments on investment migration policies. And in the last 5 years, we realized that we have the privilege of working with these individuals, extremely wealthy, choosing different nationalities or residences. But these governments are not sensible enough to leverage from these investments and help the refugees. So we'll talk more about it later, but I think that we're in the centerpiece of crossroad of billions of dollars of wealthy migrants who are 0.1% of people on the move. And we should leverage their impact to help the refugees. Thank you.
Thanks, Armand. You mentioned the importance of technology and innovation. We're going to come to that. Many of you may be aware the World Food Programme is, with our response to refugees, starting to use some of these technologies like blockchain, where we have 106,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan right now who receive their monthly cash entitlements via a blockchain system. And that's one kind of response we're experimenting with, but I agree with you. I think we've been a bit slow to bring technology and innovation to this area. Mike, if I turn to you, you mentioned you're an NGI, non-governmental individual. You've been doing some fascinating work with refugees right at the ground level. Maybe tell us a little bit about that perspective that you're seeing to kind of complement the macro picture Armand was saying. What are you seeing in terms of needs, and what are you finding in terms of how you're looking at that experience?
Yeah, well, again, this is a major problem of the world, and trying to take a holistic approach to that. As an individual, I can choose where to go. I've been to close to 100 refugee camps now in different places, and there's some commonalities. After getting safety and the basic needs, people really want information. Where's the future for my family? Then the next thing people usually mention is education for their children. They really don't want their kids missing out on the critical learning years. And so I think, these are commonalities throughout every different country, every different situation. And the way that we're kind of approaching that is, really trying to, in addition to meeting the basic needs, also kind of setting up cultural infrastructure. Not only doing food and water and shelter, but also including, public space, some urban planning into these places, a chance for refugees themselves to interact with each other. And that's really kind of one of the main hypotheses we have, because in addition to these information and, one of the biggest things that needs to be changed is like mindset and dignity, that there's this belief that other people have that refugees are not capable, and then refugees also in turn have that same internalized experience. And so one of the things we're really trying to focus on is, we built an amphitheater. We're recreating like the Agora, the ancient Greek urban planning, inside of a 60-year-old refugee camp, and with the hope that they're empowered, they feel seen, and they get to interact with each other and figure out their own solution. And that's where I think technology can really be added, that if you can educate the refugees themselves on what blockchain technology is capable of and be able to learn how to code even, that would be where I'm most optimistic about the best solutions for them coming up, is once they have a chance to interact with each other. So cultural response is one of the things that is a gap in the humanitarian system, and that's one of the things we're focusing on to flesh out those ideas that refugees will come up with for their own particular situation.
So you mentioned that there's all sorts of needs beyond just the basic ones. One of the things we see is a lot of times refugees will have lost their IDs, or their IDs are not valid in their host country, or whatever the case may be. So we know, and a lot of the talk around this area is in identification. So Mariana, you're working specifically on this issue. How do you see the importance of identification and...
I think this is a critical point, and I really like the title of this session today, Reinventing the Refugees' Experience. As someone who has spent so much time at the World Bank and engaging with the UN, I often hear that we need to save the refugees and that we need to do something for them without actually inviting them to join the conversation. So what I particularly like about this panel, and thank you to Arton and to GBBC team, is the diversity of this panel, not only gender-wise,
We're
but
not
also
doing well on that front, but
okay. From background perspective and the journey that each of us has traveled, I think it's pretty remarkable to be able to have this conversation at Davos. Of course, Davos is a very privileged place, and we don't get to see many refugees here, but I find in this room it's really remarkable that we can talk about that. And I have been personally affected by lack of identity, which is why I have initiated, while I was at the World Bank, the Identification for Development global program, which today is one of the biggest programs at the World Bank. ID for the Agenda has about $1 billion to assist governments in emerging markets to modernize their identification programs and try to include the most vulnerable and marginalized populations. So I was born in the poorest country in Europe, in Moldova, and has also been, like many on this panel, forced to flee poverty or other circumstances where I found myself lacking an identity and being recognized for what I'm worth because I didn't have the right passport. So I wanted to address this issue while being at the World Bank. The problem is that today, we are still building very centralized and siloed country-wise identification systems, which do not talk to each other. Even in the context of EU agreements, you still need to have passports from different countries to travel across borders. Moreover, if you don't have a proof of your identity, you can become prey to human traffickers, to smugglers, to those who can coerce you into modern slavery. And figures are staggering, and the latest report by United Nations actually was pointing that a lot of young girls and children are being affected by this problem. So what we want to do at the World Identity Network, and it's a non-profit, is to bring together technologists, but also activists, human rights activists who can help address these humanitarian issues. And this is why, again, I'm happy to sit here where we have such a diversity of views in how we can place identity to solving these global challenges.
We were talking about other needs, so identity is one. We know financial services and access to some of these things is another. What from your perspective, what do you see as some of these problems or challenges that refugees face?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, the problem is way bigger. Obviously, we're focusing on the refugee issue, but this is a very broader problem. I'll give you one example. Today, 20% of households in Miami or Detroit are completely unbanked. This is a vicious cycle of poverty, right? If you don't have a bank account, you're literally the only way for you to save money is to put under your mattress. And this is actually, and it's happening in various different elements of life, even outside of refugee experience, right? I always give the example, if now a foreigner goes to China, and because WeChat, you can only open a bank account if you have a Chinese bank account. I mean, you're literally unbanked, practically speaking, right? You cannot order a taxi. A lot of stores only take WeChat Pay and Alipay, right? Or other examples we're seeing right now, people, because of certain activities, I can tell you for me, a lot of my crypto clients, one of their biggest problems is for the company is to open a bank account. It's almost impossible. A lot of them are getting their personal bank account shut down because the banks have said, you're dealing in blockchain or crypto, you're deeming you a bigger risk. And those guys have real issues as well. But also the broader element, I mean, we're talking about identity, when we talk about KYC, AML, counterterrorism financing, it's not really working. According to the World Bank right now, despite the billions we spend every year, only in the US, we spend around $50 billion in AML a year. It's great for consulting firms, we make a lot of money with it, but despite all the money we're spending, we're capturing less than 1% to 2% of launder transactions. So if somebody tells you drug dealers are using Bitcoin, frankly, it's not a great way to launder money. You're better off using the existing tools, the banking system we have today, because it's not working. And this is, I think, what the beauty we have now with some of the tools we have. And I think identity plays a big role in it. We can hopefully start addressing it. There's some interesting things going on, with in certain countries. For example, the best example I love to give is Venezuela. I mean, as you guys may have, I don't know if you've been following the news, we're going through historical data the last 24 hours in Venezuela, for example. I run these TV shows on my LinkedIn social media channels. I was interviewing recently the CEO of Dash, which is a pretty known cryptocurrency. Half of their market adoption, merchant adoption, is happening in Venezuela, where crypto is a genuine use, where, and I know as now these migrants are going to Colombia, Chile, Peru, we're seeing the adoption go there as well. So it's very interesting, but really this is a broader problem that is way bigger, that touches financial inclusion. Again, and I'll finish off with this, 57% of Americans don't have $400 in their account in savings. That means there's 1% out of two, if the chance the person next to you does not have money, living paycheck to paycheck, which is a whole idea right now. A government shutdown. You see the impact we have, and hopefully these are some of the problems we'll be able to solve with identity and with blockchain and crypto as we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Henri. We might not cover all that scope and follow up.
Pretty big one topic.
Doing a good job of painting the picture. I guess I would like then, we've touched on this issue of technology and how it can help, but I want to focus in a little bit. So what are the technologies that we're seeing out there that really hold promise, or that we think are opportunities right now? So Mariana, maybe I start with you, because you talked about what you're trying to achieve. You haven't really talked about the technological aspect of it.
Absolutely. And again, when I was at the World Bank, I tried to solve the global issue of lack of identification. In 2014, there were about 2.5 billion people, almost like a third of the world's population without an identity. And then we supported programs like India's Aadhaar program and other centralized systems to help governments enroll biometrically the people who don't have any proof of ID. However, in the light of some high-profile security breaches that impacted India's Aadhaar program, but also globally, Facebook and Equifax and other entities, we realized that there must be a better way of doing this. And when I say we, is really the global community, really driven by experiences which were brought to us by refugees, by human rights activists who were really pointing us to the security breaches. And this is how I came to discover blockchain technology and its potential to provide self-sovereign identity, which is something that we fully endorse and promote as part of our work at the World Identity Network. So what it does is that it allows individuals to have control over their identity data and be able to share it with third parties as they wish, as they see fit. It also allows not to store personally identifiable data, and this is critical in situations like we heard in the refugee camps where Rohingya were identified and persecuted on the basis of their ethnicity, which is a big problem. So this is being done by the usage of zero-knowledge proofs, which is something that is being developed by various teams around the world. The problem with that, of course, is a little bit with the entire blockchain ecosystem, is that we still need time and it has to reach a certain scale. But I personally view this not as a technological problem and more as a political one. We need to really create an enabling environment and work with superpowers of this world. And I've been part of the World Bank and work with the United Nations. I think we need really a combination of approaches. While top-down approach has worked in certain circumstances, now we really need to create a global movement of global citizens who would support this view.
Let me turn to the rest of the panel. Opportunities for technology, things you've seen that look promising. What would you suggest?
First of all, I think obviously being a FinTech guy, there's a lot of ways we can solve these issues, right? I mean, we're talking about on the financial inclusion side right now. There's a lot of tools that are there that can help a lot of refugees on the banking side, but also on the we call financial health, where all of us, we go, we exercise for our physical health, we meditate or we pray for our mental health, but we're not using technology for our financial health. And that's one of the good things with FinTech we can come to hopefully and help. But it's still, I have to say, when we come to blockchain, there's still some problems. And I think as a blockchain ecosystem, we have to be rational as well. I always say when you have a hammer, you see nails everywhere, right? Blockchain is obviously not necessarily technology. A part of the technological issues on the scalability and others. What we're realizing actually from a financial services perspective it's happening way slower than we expected it. There's a lot of great proof of concepts and pilots, and it looks good. It's great for CEO speeches, but actually in practice, the adoption is happening way slower. A great report actually from McKinsey, who just actually had the courage to go out public last month and actually mention some of the problems we're having with blockchain technology from that perspective. I think there's certain use cases on provenance that there's a lot of good applications. However, on, for example, GDPR, right, the right to be forgotten. I know a lot of people are working on the solution, but when it's on a blockchain, how you actually be able to deal with your right to be forgotten solution. What I found with technology, there was a lot of good opportunities we're having. Land titling. 70% of the population today does not have land titling. That means the house, the cabin they're living in, whatever they own, they don't have the land title for it, the title for it. What means you cannot get a mortgage. It actually again traps you into that circle. The depending economists you speak to, there's about $20 trillion that we're losing of lost capital because of that. There's other solutions like chatbots. I have a TEDx talk on this where the legal profession, think about the refugee who wants to know what are their rights as a refugee. If you're going to go see a lawyer, I'm a lawyer by background, I can tell the system, again, is not working very well. You come and speak, you have a bottleneck. Whereas now we're finally seeing chatbots where the questions are always the same, right? Or immigration, right? The questions are, it's decision trees. And these we can code them very easily. Any programmer can tell you that from that perspective. Or smart contracts, again. So there's a lot of good things we're able to leverage. Again, not on blockchain, but definitely more technologically related to it.
Mike, are refugees asking for technology?
Yes. I come from Palo Alto, so technology is kind of my religion. I believe in innovation, hopefully for progress. And to quote William Gibson, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And to quote myself, talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so one of the things that we've been doing is bringing technology into the camps. Things like VR, I'll do some 360, VR capture so that other people can see what the camps are like. But I also will bring that technology and show people what's out there and put it in their hands and see what they can create and see the rest of the world. I showed one, there's a Cirque du Soleil experience, and there's a whole acrobatic thing, and you're in an empty theater, and everyone watches the acrobats. But one kid was looking at just the empty theater the whole time. And when he took it off, I said, why didn't you, watch the acrobats? Everyone watches the acrobats. And he said, because I'm a poet, and I realized if I'm going to perform on a stage like this, I'm going to have to work really hard. So I think there's all sorts of ways that it can work both ways. And and drones. Another affiliation I have is with Planet Labs, planet.com. That's a technology that they're taking a photo of the entire Earth every day, so you can really see movements. You can predict landslides, like in the Rohingya situation. So there's tons of really amazing new technologies that were never possible before, and the evolving blockchain, which I'm really excited to see. But I also still am a little bit cynical because we need to figure out a toilet that works. We need to figure out how to not have plastic everywhere that is, a problem all over the world, not just in refugee camps. But I see refugee camps as this kind of blank slate. People are starting over that I really think we can prototype these type of future society we hope to live in is going to be easier to do in a brand new refugee camp than in a London or in New York. And the other main thing besides technology that I think really can reinvent the refugee experience is policy. Uganda, the reason I'm focused in Uganda is because refugees are allowed to work and they're allowed to move freely. And if you really want to see a group of people thrive and survive and be independent and not dependent, policy is really important. And if you have open policy, technology has a way of making itself, seeping into the solution potential that it has.
Armand, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Mike on policy because unfortunately we live in governments that are of course managed by cabinets and ministers, and this slows down the process. Just yesterday the European Commission issued reports on migration investment industry and how unsafe it is for Europe. Now, we're a financial advisory company, so we like numbers. In the last 3 years, this represents 10,000 individuals who poured $8 billion in Europe. This is 0.002% of the total refugees and migrants that came in. And the time spent on these reports, instead of investing in technology and how leveraging these people experience, money, know-how, and helping their own brother and sisters, because most of these investors are coming from the same countries where the refugees are. And as you said, it is about our kids. So it doesn't matter if the guy goes first class or private plane, or the refugee takes a boat and risks his life, he's doing it for his kids. So putting things in perspective from policy, unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, it is becoming a political tool. Gain power, keep power. And this is the failures that I see. Again, it is also about money, because we cannot implement the technology that we need without the funding. And I just ask these questions in terms of 50 or 100 million per year is maybe on a UN level invested in the technology. This is nothing. And this is why the speed is not there. So it is a problem of the policy, and without the funding, unfortunately, the camps will stay like this for another 50 years. And as I mentioned, they will grow. The number of people into these camps will grow. So we believe as a Arton Capital that European Union, if we have to listen to our politician, is going to take generations. It is in our own hands as citizens of the world to make a difference. It doesn't matter which company you work, what do you do. I think each of one of us has the responsibility to do his own act about mobility. And my quote is that I see the future through the eyes of my kids. All of us being from refugee or immigrant background, were crossing Europe 20 years ago by 14 borders. My kids don't know borders in Europe today. So I don't believe that their kids will see borders. And this is what we should all work together to achieve as a society.
Boy, I'm finding it hard to... yeah. Well said. I'm finding it hard in this panel to be a moderator, not a panelist. So let me abuse the moderator role for a second, because I can't resist. We see, at the World Food Program, we literally work with the most vulnerable people in the world, those suffering from hunger. And the way we look at these issues of the kind of basic needs, toilets and things, as well as technology, is really they have to be, at this point in time, at this point in history, they should be in tandem. And so we absolutely need to make sure there are functioning toilets, that the right conditions are there on the ground, people have decent shelter. At the same time, we know how important, as you were saying, how important connectivity is. We know how important and such a vital lifeline that is for so many people. And so we know that, or we believe that ultimately achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals set out by the member states of the UN, by 2030 is going to mean that we need to innovate, we need to do all the basics, but we need to innovate on top. And so it's critical that we do those things in tandem. Okay, so that being said, I would actually, one thing I've heard a little bit this week in Davos is some of the talk around tech lash. So the backlash coming from some of the things we've seen that are perceived as abuse of our data, privacy and things. And I have to say, when we deal with vulnerable people at the World Food Program that we serve, we have to keep in mind a certain level of data privacy, because the fact is we are custodians of their data, that we're not yet at self-sovereign data management. So I'd appreciate reflections from the panel on what are the risks involved in some of the technology, like blockchain or other technology that, one thing blockchain is great for is collecting a massive amount of data, but that comes with some risks, or does it? I'd love your views.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I've been saying many times, without quoting myself though, I will say that technology can be used for good as it can be used for evil. And as a global community, we need to really be mindful of that. And I think many things that happened in our lives kind of derailed because we didn't really think hard enough. And again, I'm going to mention Facebook because this is the most notorious example, but there are many others, including abuse of identity data of refugees in refugee camps that I think, being stored in centralized databases, poorly managed, be it by United Nations agencies or other local NGOs, who then shared this data based on some data sharing agreements, or they just had been hacked. I mean, this happens everywhere, and nobody expected that, nobody knew how to deal with that. Yet, lives had been at risk. And I've mentioned the Rohingya. There have been many other examples in other refugee camps, including in Jordan, where people were not been able to access food because their biometrics hadn't been read by the biometric terminals. So in India, same thing, people died or had been cut out completely of the system because nobody could read their biometric data, so they had been left out. So as we look towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and we say we should leave no one behind, I think this comes with considering the role of technology and the security of the data and everything that we are putting out there. But also what I would like to say is that technology should not be seen as an emancipatory tool, as a silver bullet that will solve all the problems. And once a refugee has an ID or access to a blockchain-based system, then he or she will be able to do everything they want. This is not true. This is not realistic. We need to think more globally and create the enabling environment which will allow that to happen. So many around the politics, but also the social change that you've mentioned are critical points to be mindful of and reinvent this refugee experience.
From your perspective, when refugees you work with, is their data privacy a big priority for them, or on the pyramid they have more basic needs?
Yeah.
Very interested.
Let's see. There was a big amount of corruption exposed in Uganda. And so they said, like this one camp, they said there were 180,000 people. Then it turned out there were only 90,000. And so they've had to go in and redo a full census and collect everyone's status. So it is definitely on people's minds. I don't know about exactly from the refugee perspective, but not having funds and resources disappear due to corruption is a huge benefit that people actually get their fair share. Yeah.
Other risks around usage of technology in this kind of context?
Well, I just want to agree as well that I think on the pyramid of priorities, I understand if you were working, living in the developed world, that data has a lot of information. When you're in a refugee camp, there is no credit card, a balance statement, or assets that you're really going to expose. I do understand you have a different view, but I think the positive outcome of the technology is 20, 30 times more than the potential risk of identity theft. I know in some cases it's a question of life when this information is used for tracking political opponents and etc. But again, in the perspective of the numbers, we're talking millions of people that could have something that they didn't have. And there is always this measurement of positive and negative effects of technology. I think the question of who owns the data, that is the next big problem. Today, as you know, even applying for visas, everybody has to go through an embassy with the physical paperwork. But there is a talk, of course, for a centralized system on tourist visas. But the problem is who will own that information on citizens of the different countries. No country wants to have that shared with other intelligence communities.
Absolutely agree. And one big risk that I see, and I hadn't seen it before when I was working at the World Bank, it's only after I started to interact with human rights activists and started to go to, they call it the Davos of the dissidents, Oslo Freedom Forum, which is really interesting. I'm saying this while sitting at Davos. But Human Rights Foundation is working with political opponents and those who are fleeing authoritarian regimes like the one in North Korea or China, and who are reporting on the human rights abuses where states are building surveillance systems which are really, really frightening. Like take the social credit rating in China right now, which uses identity as a basis but then adds to it layers that attest reputation points to every person, and it's really really sickening because you see those people being tracked and being even more lured into the demagogy of this authoritarian regime. So how do we first raise awareness about that? I really think that we need, as I mentioned, a diversity of perspectives represented at the table where these systems are being designed and discussed and approved. We need to have people coming from those countries where they lived through this horrendous experience to inform us and to let us know that, guys, what you are building can actually have this risk, and it is going to affect all of us later on, or our children, and we need to be mindful of that.
So I was having a really interesting conversation last night where this notion came up of when we are bringing people who are not yet digitally engaged into digital systems, does it actually give us a kind of a greenfield or clean slate advantage on issues like self-managed data and things like that? In other words, is there an opportunity for people who really have not been participating in that kind of those kinds of systems to learn from the beginning that they are in charge and control of their data? And the value of that data, because quite frankly, I think the rest of us in the developed world have just rushed into the data age and haven't really realized the value. Now we're starting to see that techlash. So, is there a clean slate opportunity? Mike, you were mentioning something about, that you see refugee camps as clean slates.
Yeah, I think it might also be an age thing as well, that the digital natives, even in developing countries, are really keen to pick up technology very quickly. There's definitely a layer of education that needs to come with blockchain, and it's still kind of nascent, and everyone's still kind of gaining their own understanding. But absolutely, I mean, you put a brand new Mac in front of Refugee, and they'll be able to edit videos and make really good stuff. There's this tendency to be like, oh, we can't give them nice things because it will be stolen. They're hungry for technology. They're hungry for the newest, greatest things. They love drones. So I don't think that, there are potential risks, and we should definitely weigh them. But I think they're hungry, waiting. They want to be a part of it. Even just seeing what's next is exciting. To know what else is out there, to be exposed, to have their own imagination flourish by all of the amazing things, like the drone alone. People seeing a drone that can come back and I can land in my hand, and the AI on the software edits the video together with music right away. Like, it blows people's minds, and that's really one of the things that I'm trying to do. That's, again, not only blockchain, but technology in general that hasn't reached there. It's inspiring. It leads to you to put piece together to be like, oh, with that I can do this, and and that's how innovation happens. And refugees are no different. Absolutely not.
It's interesting, because it comes into the notion of trust at the end of the day. I remember, I do this with in Hong Kong, where I teach to my students. I used to ask them every year for the last 5 years, who do you trust more with your money and your data? Is it a company like Alipay or Alibaba, or actually a traditional bank like an HSBC or the like? And the majority of my students, and remember, these are like they're early 20 years old, around that age, and they don't have much money anyways. Their view is that actually most of them would trust more the technology firm more than actually the bank, which is very interesting. And I started seeing a shift this year with obviously everything happened last year with Facebook, the Senate testimonies and so on and so forth, that we're starting to see the shift happen even with the students right now, which is a very interesting data point on a personal perspective. What I find even the most interesting from my students' perspective, they often tell me, if I'm getting something in exchange, I'm very happy to share my data. And China for this is a great use case. We're talking about social scoring, which obviously has many of its flaws. But actually, if I'm able to get something in return, I'm happy to do it. For example, now I give my data on Facebook. Obviously, I'm not getting anything in return except using a platform or Google to be able to search it. But I fundamentally believe that a part of it managing our own data will be able to get compensated for it. And the other thing is that not all data is worth the same. If I have a 9-to-5 job, and I'm a regular person, or if I'm a mountain climber that goes skiing every weekend, my data may be more valuable to certain companies, and people want to get it. So I think we'll be able to monetize our data depending of who we are. And the only way we're going to be able to do this is with crypto. Because using traditional payment mechanisms, the beauty of crypto is you can do these million micro payments that will be able to happen. There's already a lot of companies trying to develop these technologies. Often it's going to happen with the machine-to-machine economy as well. It will happen behind the scenes without us knowing it. But I personally believe one of the big policy decisions, debates we're going to have. The last presidential election was about a wall and immigrants and and we've had all these big debates, thematics every couple of years. I fundamentally believe one of the big ones we'll have. I don't know, it'll be the next election or one after. We have policy about our data, and because there's a big camps. I'll give you one example of the social scoring in China. Obviously, I still live in China and I studied there and I still go to a lot. When you ask, a lot of our people are actually quite happy because it's better. For all the reasons we know, they're happy with it. It's better, more convenient, tailored. But obviously, there's a lot of people are worried about. You have a lot of people that are completely unbanked because of certain comments they put on some of these platforms. Now they're cut off from the big tech platforms. But there was a survey I was reading recently in China where women want to know their social score of their future partner. So it really depends on what angle you're looking at. You cannot be selective on when you want to see it and when you don't want to see it. So it's a very interesting debate how it's going from that perspective. But I really believe it's going to be one of the biggest policy decisions we'll need to make over the next coming years.
And Armand, just on that point, you already talked a little bit about role of government, but what do you think the policy debates are going to be or need to be?
Well, I think in terms of clean slate, yes, I see what technology and blockchain can do to migration, what mobile communication did in Africa. When you start from scratch, you are able to do much more and faster. So we're just surprised why this hasn't been done yet in migration. But yet again, we look at the age of our governments. And again, looking at the new generation of prime ministers in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France. This is the Generation X taking power now. It's our age, 40 to 50. So we hope to bring that change. And we hope to see that faster than what we're leading today.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think we'll start to draw us to a close. I guess my final round of questions to you would be your thoughts. We're sitting here in Davos. We have, lots of powerful people around and policymakers and decision makers and business leaders and so on. What would be your message to these people about what needs to happen next when it comes to reinventing the refugee experience or the migrant experience in relation also to this issue and use of technology?
I think we should all come together as a global community and redefine and redesign this cornerstone of the human evolution. Global identity being central to our evolution as human beings. Looking into the future, I think we need to come all together and imagine something that works for everyone.
On my side, I'll be just with policymakers. I'm very lucky. I spend a lot of my time working with many governments and regulators. It's actually providing clarity. So when it comes to, for example, blockchain payments, actually regulators are doing a pretty good job. Frankly, I don't think regulators get the credit they deserve in the crypto blockchain space in many countries. I can tell you the average regulator that I speak with is way more knowledgeable on crypto assets than the average financial services professional and many other government officials as well. Only last 24 hours in the UK, when we heard, we had some regulatory clarity on that actually Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, they call them payment tokens, are outside the scope of the FCA, which is actually a good thing because now we know that we have the clarity on it. We've had countries over from Liechtenstein to, on a policy perspective, Malta, Gibraltar, Hong Kong, where now we have that clarity, which is actually quite good. That allows now the ecosystem to build. And I'm very confident actually this year we'll have that clarity, at least from a regulatory perspective, which is often one of the obstacles that we've had in that broader, because we need the entire players of the ecosystem to play together to be able to improve and move it forward.
I'd say the humanitarian industrial complex needs a tremendous revision and rethinking, and we need
now,
to...
why do you have to now open up a new one, Mike? No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please finish.
I use that term. Well, just this idea of dependency is flawed and not sustainable. We need to look at refugee camps, I think, more like property managers than like prisons or nursing homes, which are really expensive to run. And for the people of Davos that are here with all your great new ideas and all your tremendous resources, I think we need to build prototype camps, prototype cities, 100,000 people at once, 10,000 people at once. Personally, I think they should be 50-50, nationals and refugees. But let's build a bunch of those. Let's, we're going to learn. We can implement everything from a clean slate, not just trying to patch already crappy camps, to be honest. So that's what I'd like to see. Let's build some prototypes. Let's find some land. Let's bring all the different people that aren't only in the humanitarian sector, and let's put some investment into what it looks like for a group of displaced people to soon after be independent from aid.
Well, we're in Davos, indeed. So 4.0 globalization cannot happen without global mobility. And I think we're using migration to create fear instead of showing the successful cases. 40% of the S&P companies are run today by migrants from first or second generation. 60% of the companies in Shanghai, publicly traded, are managed by Chinese who were abroad and came back. So instead of trying to stop the flow of mobility, increase it, because this is how we're going to increase as a human race.
Armand, can you say a couple of words about the Global Citizenship Forum? Because it's such a good forum that tackles these issues.
Thank you. We are 5 years decided to create a platform on migration. So every year we bring government officials, we work with stakeholders, but as well celebrities, because when we talk about global citizen, it touches everybody. And we are bringing it, again, as an Armenian, proudly bring it back to Armenia this year in October. So you're all invited and hope to see you there, where we're going to talk exactly about the role of technology in migration. And in one of the oldest nations in the world adopted Christianity, today is opening door to a lot of migrants from the region in the Middle East that look a safe harbor. So proudly as Armenians and the first-time Armenian Prime Minister in Davos, we launched announcing last night. So thank you.
Well, I want to sincerely extend my thanks to all of you for those tremendous thoughts. What a fantastic conversation from so many different perspectives. I really enjoyed that. I also want to say thank you to all of you who are here in person, all of you who are joining online. And this is Reinventing the Refugee Experience coming from Blockchain Central at Davos 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. I said we're talking about a global citizen, and actually it's wonderful because we're working in this direction to the global citizen. But as a journalist traveling around Africa and around other countries, there is people who rip their passports and identity when they are in the ocean because their identity is their problem. That's what will bring them back to the depart point. And a lot of them, they are worried about having identity, so they stop talking. They don't want to tell where they are from because they're worried to go back. So by talking about this identity, digital identity that you cannot get rid of, how can we convince these people that we're not again using their identity? Because it's going to be the problem as a passport, as the digital identity. The only thing that passport you can rip it. The digital identity is a part of you, so you cannot rip it. So how can we convince all these hundreds of thousands of people to accept to be part of this program? Because if they don't, then we have again millions of people who are not. They're going to be again refugees of the identity. What is the solution to that?
Yeah, I'll try to answer some of this. Yes, hello, thanks. No, that's fine. So I think the issues you are raising are really good ones. I don't think they are related to identity per se. I think everyone on earth has right to identity and de facto has an identity. The problem that you are signaling is more like, how are we using this identity? What are the abuses that happen here and there? And this global identity is not a program. It should be a concept of appertenance of every individual on earth to a community which is global and where they can travel around the world and exercise their rights in a free manner that is not exactly, like you say, dependent on a specific digital identity program of one country or of one region. This is how I see things.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is a big challenge. I agree with you. Unfortunately, we have to live through it in order to see the results of implementing that change compared to the old system, which we have been running for 100 years since passport exists. So let's give it a try.